you need trigger warnings for about stuff you may read or stuff a professor may say? Why do you need trigger warnings?
We have a mental health crisis. It begins with kids born in 1995.
Jonathan Haidt is a social and cultural psychologist known for co-authoring the book, The Coddling of the American Mind. His research focuses on how safety culture and overprotection contribute to rising anxiety and mental health issues. Let's hear what he has to say on the issue.
We call them Gen Z, or Gen Z, you would say, or iGen for the internet generation. So when this generation arrives on campus, in the United States, that's around age 18, they come to the university. So in 2013, the first members of Gen Z come to campus. And that's when all of these things start. None of us had heard of these terms practically. But by 2014, in a few schools, students were asking for protections from words, books, speakers, ideas. They were treating them as though they were dangerous. Of course, students can protest and have protested words, books, speakers, and ideas, but they never before said, if this is presented, if this person comes, I or someone will be traumatized, harmed, damaged. This was new. We call this in the book, Greg Lukianoff and I call it safetyism, the worship of safety, the view of the world as safe versus dangerous. Americans now, young Americans talk about emotional safety. We used to call it emotional discomfort. Socrates reveled in creating emotional discomfort on the way to learning. Many of us are reluctant to do that now because if I create emotional discomfort in my students, they might take that as that they're unsafe, and there's a number to call, there's an email to call to report me. Even from class, they can report me if they think I've made them unsafe.
Jonathan Haidt, a former provocative teacher, now avoids this style of teaching to prevent student backlash, reflecting a cultural shift where educators fear being reported for causing emotional discomfort in increasingly sensitive campus environments. But it doesn't just happen in the classroom.
It happens to a lot of people. So we all share stories. When I started this in 2015, people thought that we were exaggerating, we're talking about a few anecdotes, because it was just starting then. Now it has spread so far that even though most students are fine, most students are not depressed, they want to learn, they want to be exposed, but if you have a class of 300 students, you now have to teach to the most sensitive student because any one of them can report you. We're very careful about exploring hypotheses that could be taken as contrary to received wisdom on politically sensitive topics. Let's take gender, for example. So it's commonly said that women earn 70% as much as men. Now, that's a true fact in the United States, but that doesn't account for hours worked or job picked. If you correct for those, then we're up in the 90s. But it sounds better to say that women are only paid 70% as much as men for the same work. Any social scientist knows that's a meaningless statistic unless you equate for the kind of job and the hours worked. But I have seen social scientists, I've seen people say this from the stage, that women are only paid 70% as much, and I've seen another social scientist who know that that's not true, won't say anything because you don't want to be called sexist, you don't want to be seen as challenging, as somehow denying or minimizing the problem.
Do students dictate what is taught and said on campuses?
Well, you have to think about it in terms of everybody is making a calculation as they walk through. We're all caught in a minefield. We're all walking through a world in which one word we say, and this is true for everybody, faculty, students, everybody. One word, one thing you say can be misreported or properly reported on Twitter, and it blows up into something. So we're all stuck in this, and this is one of the reasons for the mental health crisis. What we know from surveys that we've conducted, I run an organization, or used to, called Heterodox Academy. We've surveyed students. What we know is that they are afraid to speak up in class, or many of them report that they self-censor, mostly because they're afraid of other students. Professors are mostly afraid of other students. The students, again, Gen Z, which grew up with the ability to block things that they don't want, block people they don't want. They're very adept at social media. And so what's happened is we don't trust each other. It's very difficult for professors to trust their students. We can trust most of them, but that's not enough.
Anti-fragility, coined by Nassim Taleb, describes how resilience develops through adversity. Just as the immune system strengthens through exposure to bacteria, humans grow stronger by facing stress, exclusion, and discomfort. These small challenges during childhood are essential for developing the resilience needed to handle larger challenges in adulthood. Jonathan explains.
This glass is fragile, and if I drop it, it will break, and it won't be better, it will be broken. And so we give kids plastic cups because plastic is resilient. But if a kid drops a plastic cup, it doesn't get better. There are a few things that need to be dropped. There are a few things that have to be challenged in order to configure themselves. So the immune system is the best example. If you protect your kids from bacteria and peanuts, they will have more autoimmune diseases and more likely to have peanut allergies. So the immune system requires exposure to all sorts of things. Well, it turns out human beings are anti-fragile. Human beings require, we have to experience stress, exclusion, teasing, insults. We have to experience these things in small doses as kids to set the social system that allows it to wire itself up so that we can face larger things by the time we're adults. In the United States now, we have gone so far towards protecting kids. My daughter, when she was in 3rd grade last year in New York City public schools, the girls would form groups on the playground, and hers was the kitty cat club, and only members of the kitty cat club could hang out in a certain place. And so the teacher said, well, she led them through why we can't exclude people. It's wrong to exclude people. Well, okay, it's a good discussion to have, but if my daughter were to go all the way through schooling without having those experiences, when she gets to college, she won't be able to handle small things. That's what we think is happening. Kids are actually anti-fragile in the United States and in Britain. You've been raising kids as though they're fragile. One of your head teachers recently banned snowball fights because what if someone gets hit in the eye? If we protect kids from small risks, they don't learn how to face larger risks.
What 2 problems have become common in the United States in the last few years?
The first is that we have, I'd say, a mental health crisis for boys and a mental health catastrophe for girls. What I mean by that is that rates of anxiety and depression were fairly stable in the from 2000 to 2010, and then they begin rising very sharply. For boys, rates of major depression are up about 30%. For girls, they're up about 40%. Some people say this is just self-report, it's not real. But rates of hospital admission for self-harm are up in the same way for girls, not for boys though. For suicide in the United States, suicide for teenage boys is up 25% from the first decade of the century if you look at the rise to the last 2 or 3 years. 25% increase. For girls, it's 70%, 70% increase. I just looked at the numbers for the UK on my way over here. The Guardian has had a lot of really good coverage of the various studies that have come out. It's the exact same thing. You too have no rise at all in hospital admissions for boys. Boys are not cutting themselves more, but your girls are going to the hospital much more because they cut their bodies and are bleeding. You also have, even though the suicide rate, I think it was in England and Wales, even though that suicide rate is going down to historic levels overall, the rate for teenage girls has reached its highest level ever.
It seems that young people are facing mental health problems due to overprotection and social media. Parents, starting in the 1980s, became more protective, fearing dangers like kidnapping, even as crime rates dropped. This limited children's free play and their ability to handle challenges on their own. Social media, especially hard on girls, adds pressure and stress. Trigger warnings and safe spaces in schools, meant to protect students from discomfort, may actually teach them to avoid tough situations rather than build resilience. By being overprotective, society may be preventing young people from growing stronger and learning how to deal with real-world problems, calling for a balance that encourages independence and resilience.